All right, good afternoon, everyone. Very excited to be with you guys today. I'm very excited for the guest we have. Amie Summers is an amazing psychotherapist that I've known for a while and really love the work that she does because it's working with the nervous system, which we love in our office. So if you are at home and your child is struggling with a past trauma, maybe anxiety, depression, grief, even behavior issues, this is an interview you definitely want to join us for because those are some of the topics we're going to talk about today. So Amie, if you don't know her, like I said, is an amazing psychotherapist. She has worked with a lot of kids and even adolescents, adults over the years. And the field that she works in, the type of therapy that she does is in the category of called organic intelligence, which she's going to share some about today. Really some amazing work because it helps to unlock these patterns that kiddos get stuck in. And she does, the cool thing too is she involves play, she involves sensory work, talking with kids, and really getting them engaged on a much deeper level than sometimes typical therapy does. So I think especially if you've been stuck maybe with typical therapy for yourself or your child, then you definitely want to join us today. So welcome, Amie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always such a joy to connect with people who are out in the world doing great work and with families and to talk about this work and just like coming together around wellness for the people that we get to serve. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Happy to have you here. I think especially in these categories because we see some of these issues are getting so big nowadays. We're seeing more and more and more of it. And also the traditional methods, I feel a lot of times plateau, where you start to go and then all of a sudden you just hit this stuck point and parents become frustrated because they don't know why they're not making progress and they start to run. They feel like they're running out of options to help their kiddos. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of what makes organic intelligence unique is that it's the framework of it actually comes out of complex science. And that's a science that's being used in all kinds of fields and never really had been in psychotherapy until now. And it makes sense to apply it here because we're complex systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what we know from complex science is it gives us this nice, it's called a 3-phase model. And what really matters about that is typically clients are coming in, kids are coming in what's called phase 1. It's like the chaos phase where they're living like in fight, flight, and freeze, which are terms I think a lot of people are more familiar with now, and especially probably working with you, Dr. Ty. And
actually, so even before we jump into that phase 1, maybe what would examples parents would see for whether it's a diagnosis or something their child's struggling with, who might be the person that wants to know, like, oh, my child's in phase 1, but here's what I'm seeing at home.
Yeah, it's where it kind of seems like the struggles a person's having, and this applies to all of us, but I'll talk about it in the context of kids since that's what we're connecting about. But it's sort of like when a kiddo gets upset in the moment about something and it seems like unrelated to anything that's actually happening in the environment. So this could be, kiddos feeling highly anxious, which would be like the flight side of that sympathetic nervous system. It could be depression, which is more in like the freeze realm. It could be aggression and anger that seems kind of out of proportion. That would be the fight side of things. And it's when kids are living in those nervous system states a lot of the time, and it's disruptive to just their daily living. We all have access to fight, flight, and freeze. We actually need those. I mean, those are survival mechanisms. But what we want to see is that they kick in when they're actually needed. So it's like responsive to what's happening in the environment versus just sort of like running through our system when they aren't really needed and using up our energy, honestly, and disrupting our lives. And what can happen is kids can go into therapy for these struggles, and the way it's addressed is by having the kid and the family do things. But when a system is in, go ahead.
What would an example of doing things be? What would that?
Yeah, doing things is like top-down approaches. So that would be like cognitive behavioral therapy, DBT. It could be just like kind of homework assignments for the family, for the child, especially like for the child. And those are all helpful things for a system that is more in phase 2. A system that's in phase 1 and is like living in a lot of chaos isn't typically going to have the organization to take homework, for example, and do something with it because their system's already taxed because they're living in fight, flight, and freeze.
Okay.
And so working in this framework means that like the interventions that I use with kids and the things I invite families to be experimenting with are really strategic based on the phase the child's system is in. And so then they're much more effective and the results of the work are just more reliable. Like it's more predictable how things are going to go versus some kids, trying CBT and like it doesn't help. They aren't able to do the tasks of it. Like you said, Ty, things might get a little better and they kind of plateau. It's probably that the intervention wasn't attuned to the phase of the system.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because I can see if you have a trauma and you have all these events that spiral from it, that you're kind of tuning in where's the nervous system at along this scale. And if your toolbox, you might have an amazingly effective tool, but it might be for a narrow window.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like with organic intelligence, you're seeing where at this scale they're at and choosing the appropriate tool for the appropriate state of their nervous system.
Right, because the one of the goals is that people feel better without having to do things to feel good. There might be things that that any of us are doing in our daily life to help us feel better. And that's all awesome, but we want to continue feeling better without always having to do. Because doing is, again, it takes energy and it's only so sustainable.
Right, absolutely. I mean, especially if you're a parent trying to manage your child, like a lot of the families that we see, they already have a pretty big checklist of all the things they need to do to try to keep their child healthy or try to help them go through this healing journey. And I can see if you feel like, oh, for my child to be happy, I have to do all these things day after day after day, instead of letting that child's natural state of happiness just come to the surface.
That's right. And talking about like that natural state of happiness, this is another complex science thing, which is that complex systems, so human beings, are self-organizing. Our system is always sending us things to help us and support us. So like one example would be, I do this with my hair a lot. And if I actually stop and pay attention to it, it feels really enjoyable and my system benefits from it. But we're doing stuff like this all the time. Like our system's sending us stuff like this all the time and we're just like missing it. Because our conditioning and kind of the way our culture is means that we have a what's wrong attention. We're mostly noticing what's wrong. And it's actually the what's right, the what's going well, joy, pleasure, orientation, meaning truly being connected to this environment through our senses. So we're like really present moment. That's what's actually self-organizing. And so that's really where the early work in organic intelligence starts with kids and clients and families, parents. Yeah.
So you have, if a client's coming in, they're in that phase 1, it sounds like the more extreme fight, flight, freeze, or is it because something's not quite recognized that it even has been a trauma or is a stress? Are those some of the things you're looking for in phase 1? Or?
It's kind of both, actually. The understanding in organic intelligence is that, yes, people are given diagnoses for like behavioral mental health stuff. And a diagnosis is like a set of symptoms. And what we understand in organic intelligence is that the underpinnings of all of that is dysregulation in the physiology. Things aren't like synchronous in the physiology. And so for some people, a diagnosis can be helpful because it's like sort of an answer to the why of what's going on. From my perspective, that's sort of then the next question is, well, now what? So really this approach is non-pathologizing. It's recognizing the common physiology that underlies all of these diagnoses and symptoms and struggles. And so when a kiddo comes into the office, I mean, I'm paying attention to what their nervous system state is, and that's like the fight, flight, freeze. I'm really working on joining with them in that phase and helping them notice what feels good about being in that phase, because there's something their nervous system is needing from that phase to like feel good in it. And then what happens is once they've met that need, they can shift out of it. And so maybe an example of that would be a client who came in and she'd suffered a lot of things that we would all call traumas. She loved to hide. And her nervous system was in freeze. Hiding is a freeze response. And she did this in her daily living, and it was disruptive in certain ways. And she came in and did that in my office. And what we did was we talked together while she was hiding about what felt good about it. You know, like nobody can see you, but you know where we are. She'd bring like snacks in there. She'd have like stuffed animals and cozy blankets and pillows, and she could feel at some point in her body where safety was. So just getting to be in the freeze meant harvesting the goodness from it, the safety of it, and then she didn't need to be in freeze so much anymore. And then her system shifted out of that and things started to look different. And so when we talk about what's self-organizing, it's harvesting the goodness, the benefit from the nervous system state that the kiddo is living in, basically.
Yeah, I love that idea, because that's so much what we talk about with chiropractic as well. As the nervous system is always trying to organize, it's trying to heal. If it's doing something in the body, it's always for a reason. Right? It's not going to randomly do something it might appear as a detrimental symptom on the outside, but we know if the nervous system is doing it to the body, there's some sort of safety, some sort of protection, some sort of reason for it. And I think that's so valuable to be able to actually identify, like, hey, okay, so my child's in freeze and they're hiding. What are the benefits to it?
That's right.
And I love the opposite, that of instead of going back and saying, tell me all your traumas in life, and trying to maybe get too caught up in the negative events, you can actually say, well, we know those happen, but what's your nervous system doing today as a benefit, and going more into the positive around it.
Yeah, and that's, it's not as though the topic of a trauma a person experiences is off the table in this work. We're always attuned. We're always joining clients where they are when they come in. If they need to share explicit content about what they've experienced, we'll go there with them. But there's also this understanding that, again, it's the physiology that's speaking to us. Telling the story isn't necessarily going to change the system in a way that helps the person just feel better in their daily living. And so this kiddo I'm talking about with the hiding, it was probably months before we got to explicit content about what had happened to her. And it was when she started bringing it up. And the reason she could start bringing it up is because we had been doing all of this like play and this work and enjoying freeze and enjoying fight response in these like symbolic play scenarios, so that her system got to a place of enough organization that now the narrative could come out in a way that didn't completely overwhelm her.
Okay.
Something that's been, historically true of psychotherapy is that it's like people come in and we're trained as psychotherapists to like go for the trauma and get to the root of the problem. And that's actually just very disorganizing. It keeps the system out of sync. And something my teacher, Steve Hoskinson, the creator of organic intelligence, will say is, what's wrong with therapy is the focus on wrong. And that includes the focus on trauma.
Okay. Yeah. Because that's a really interesting topic, how you have to picture, like we talk about in our office sometimes, layers of an onion, and you might be, there's a layer underneath that is affecting things, but you can't just go straight to that. You have to go with what's available in the moment. And it sounds like this then is a way to bridge that gap and to let the nervous system reveal what it needs to a little bit at a time, and create that feeling of safety rather than try to go to something really intense and then everything just tightens up even more.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's going with what the system will show us what can be worked on today. That's going to be doing something, but not too much of something.
Mm-hmm.
And so just following what the system is showing us is ready to be worked on also touches on all of those other deeper layers of the onion without having to go through the explicit content of like the deepest layer of the onion. Mm-hmm. And so the system lets us know which layer is available in a way that can be integrated versus overwhelming and just kind of, now we're just reinforcing what's been going on for this child.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's huge because the nervous system does learn, and if you end up going maybe too intense or do something that reinforces an old pattern, it might relieve it temporarily, but then the nervous system jolts back to that pattern and now it goes back even stronger.
True. It's just like repaving the same neural pathways. And, intensity, like what you're saying, after a very intense experience, like think about like cathartic therapies or things like that, people do feel better. But what it's doing physiologically and like brain chemistry and all of that is it's reinforcing that the way to feel better is to feel worse first. And so we get conditioned then for this like high intensity is what I need in order to feel better. And that's not actually true. And that can be pretty disruptive to just living like a joyful life.
Right. I could see that with something like anxiety and then depression or bipolar, where you're getting one extreme and then the other, and your body maybe is craving all the feel-good chemicals, but then it burns out from them, so then it crashes down, and then it's like, oh, I need a big charge to build me back up instead of more steadiness.
Right. And it can even be telling the story of my trauma, which completely overwhelms my system, and then I crash, and that feels so much better.
Right.
So then it's like this association of, I must need to talk about that thing in order to feel better. And it is just this like, this really like a swinging pendulum
right.
thing. And there's something in the middle, which is gentler and effective, and it means, feeling better in a way that's longer lasting and doesn't require that intensity to be with it. Yeah.
And is that with organic intelligence, and you have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, is that sort of the progression is you're helping move the nervous system through those phases?
Can you
maybe
right.
go into the overall pathway? Because I know we talked about phase 1 is that fight, flight, freeze, and then maybe the others, what happens in those?
Yeah, so it's really like shepherding a system through these phases and watching for signs from the physiology of what phase that system is in. And so phase 1, it's starting, with attending to what the system is trying to benefit from fight, flight, freeze. And then as we like start to do that, then it's really landing orientation. So that's connecting to the environment through the senses. So kids do this much more naturally than adults do, actually. We can have a hard time just hanging in the present moment. Most kids, a lot of the time, that's not a problem for them. So when a kid comes into my office, I'm watching for like, their eyes will do this kind of scan, and then something will get their attention that's interesting, and I join them in that, and we talk about what's interesting about that thing. And so we're starting our work in orientation and orienting to pleasure, actually. And so it's using those in a more kind of doing fashion. Once the system's more in phase 2, that's when like maybe some pieces of CBT could be helpful, or more top-down approaches when a system's getting into phase 2, so there's more capacity for doing. And then as the system continues on its trajectory, phase 3 is really like, this is true of all the phases, but especially phase 3, is me just getting out of the way of the system. Because chances are, if I'm coming in with interventions, my good ideas in a phase 3, I'm just getting in the way of what the person's system knows it needs to do to self-organize and to continue to feel better. And in phase 3, what you'll see is like greater flexibility. So like if a kid used to always default to freeze response, now they'll do like fight, flight, freeze whenever it's appropriate. they can kind of ride the waves and they have more capacity, and things that used to completely dysregulate them now might be like a little blip in their day instead of like consuming their day. And so that's how things start to look in phase 3.
Okay, got it. And I'm curious, sometimes what we see when we're working with kiddos is that when we're first working with them, we actually see a behavior maybe intensify, or meltdowns intensify, or emotions, anxieties, worries, whatever it might be, intensify right away. And I know we had talked a little bit in the past about that might be someone actually going from freeze into fight or flight because of a different depth of those. Can you explain why that might happen?
Yeah, I can. And I have a drawing I created based on a nervous system map that Stephen Hoskinson created for organic intelligence that it sounds like we could maybe put in the comments section later.
Yep,
so people can get a visual on it. But what it shows is, freeze it's an absence of feeling, affect. It can look kind of like depression, hypoarousal. And so it can be misunderstood as like absence of energy. But actually the way our system works is fight or flight kind of show up as options first. And then if our system assesses, fight and flight aren't going to be helpful, freeze would be the next thing that we would shift into. And of course, we're not thinking any of this. This is our downstairs brain like helping us out. And so what happens is as the system shifts out of freeze response, you drop back down first into high intensity fight and flight, because you have to come back down through that for the system to downshift. Okay. All of that fight flight, energy is there. So that's what you're going to drop back into when you come out of freeze. And so if the system is freeze dominant, and then the next thing we notice is, parents sometimes will say like, my kid is talking back, or they're, doing this or that. And I thought things were supposed to like get better. And I was like, it's like, self-agency, fight response. Yeah, things are actually getting better, even though it's making your life as a parent a little harder right now. And so it's actually a signpost that we're headed in the right direction. We're on the trajectory of greater overall regulation. And usually it just means, what supports can we bring in and be offering parents and families to ride out that time of like dropping into that fight flight so that the system can continue its downshift. If a system comes out of freeze and then, there's a lot of like punishing or other things coming in, telling it's not okay that you are where you are, it'll just pop right back into freeze.
Wow.
And then we're just kind of stuck. Right. And so it's what can we do to allow the system to do what it needs to, but to have families, be safe and feel supported as that downshift happens into something else.
Absolutely. I could see that being such a huge issue, because I imagine fight or flight is where a lot of the symptoms are occurring that are most troublesome, or that are going to impact the family dynamic the most, or be things that, like you're saying, punishable. And so if you're already in fight or flight and you add stress by being parented intensely or harshly, or you're trying to push that back down, you're adding stress, puts them into freeze, and now maybe the symptoms disappear. So on the surface it looks better, but we know neurologically things have actually going deeper.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, it's no surprise to any of us who are parents that when it comes down to it, a lot of this work of being with our kids is about our own system, because we're phase 1, 2, or 3 as well. We've got our own, conditioning, our own fight, flight, and freeze that'll kick in to different things. A lot of that, of course, depending on how we were parented. And so it is one of those times of like having to kind of take a look at the family system too. Right. And how can the family system support the change in this child's system to allow for the continued unfolding in the direction we're hoping for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's not by any means saying it's an easy journey to be on, an easy thing to do. So having that full family support is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I even had this moment like 2 nights ago where because again, kids are they can be more well-oriented than adults, truly. And my 6-year-old, it was like bedtime and he wanted me to sing him a song. And my first impulse was like irritation, which is kind of like a low intensity fight response, where I was like, oh, it's like time for bed, like, come on. and I could recognize like, oh, he's in the present moment. And this is something that would feel good for his system. And so I took the time to sing the song because I could recognize it was my own sympathetic arousal kicking in for no good reason and getting in the way of just being in the moment with my child. And as parents, we've got our own stressors and things going on that will have us in that place. And so some of it's just starting to like observe ourselves too in relationship with our kids. And being curious about how our own system and our own conditioning might be kind of keeping our kids a little bit stuck or not super supportive as they come out of whatever state and into another state. And so how can we support the whole family system in the process?
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's huge. We see sometimes families where on the symptom level, maybe the kid is causing the most disruption, and then as the kid's starting to heal, we want to make sure the parents are moving upward with them and not bringing them back to an old state or an old pattern.
Yeah, which again isn't anything parents are doing consciously.
Right.
We're all conditioned, and none of us asked for it.
Exactly, because it started from our parents and parents before, right? And it's just the way our brains, there's so much in that subconscious or unconscious that it's just happening.
That's right.
If we don't have an outside source to maybe reflect it back to us, it's like, oh, wow, I didn't even realize I was doing that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So if someone, as we're wrapping up here, if someone was curious, maybe they've been doing therapy or they feel like they've hit a plateau and they're looking into yourself or organic intelligence, what do some of the initial steps look like to see if it would be a fit?
Yeah, I mean, typically I'll start with a phone call, and just to see if I would be a good fit, just like you're saying. And, I've kind of recognized too that there's much more interest in receiving this kind of work than there are practitioners to offer it. And so the next sort of step for organic intelligence in this local Minnesota metro community is we're going to be offering a training that starts in October of this year. So to learn organic intelligence, it's a 3-year training process. And so there, are going to be invitations out to the psychotherapy community, body workers, basically all people of, goodwill are invited to receive this learning. And then that's just going to mean growing this community and more access for families and kids. Right now I can do some consultation with parents. I'm not able to actually even to really do justice or good service to families right now because there are just so many people who are interested in this work. And but I'm always happy to have a conversation with the parent and hoping that we're moving in the direction of more of this being available really soon for families.
Definitely. Yeah, I think like we talked about in the beginning, it's such a big need nowadays. There's so much stress just in our day-to-day living. Mm-hmm. That having the support is definitely needed out there. So thank you for your good work, and I appreciate too just the willingness that you're doing to train other practitioners or parents or adults and get these resources out to families.
Yeah, thank you again for the invitation and for your service to your patients and families, and it was great talking with you today.
Yeah, same here. So we'll put that picture. If you have anything else, we can put it in the comments below. We'll put your website in there as well so people will know how to reach out to you. And then we'll be in touch. Maybe keep everyone aware of that training coming up in October as well.
All right, sounds great. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Amie. Bye, everyone.